For the first time in more than 11 years since the war in Ukraine began to escalate following Russia's invasion of Crimea, there is now serious hope for a legitimate peace deal. We're just days away from U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff arriving in Russia in hopes of brokering an agreement with the Kremlin's top brass that would be acceptable by their Ukrainian counterparts. This comes on the heels of a bombshell report from Bloomberg detailing a leaked phone call with Witkoff and a senior Kremlin official where Witkoff allegedly coached the Russians on how to negotiate with President Trump and on Putin's foreign aid policies. Joining me now to dive into all of this and more is Andrij Dobriansky. He is the Director of Communications for the Ukrainian Congress Committee. Andrij, good afternoon.
Hi, thank you for having me back on.
Andrij, you know we love when you're here because you really help to make this easy for everyone at home to understand. Andrij, I want to begin with some new news that we learned today, that a top aide to President Zelenskyy has resigned. Can you break that down for us and tell us why this is significant, Andrij?
Sure. Many viewers might be familiar with the name Yermak. Andriy Yermak is the chief of staff for the president or the head of his office. Now, previously in Ukrainian administrations, this hasn't been a big role. But much like we got to know the chiefs of staff for President Trump when he became president because he wasn't in politics, much so has the role of the chief of staff been so much more powerful during the presidency of President Zelenskyy because he came in, again, not as a politician. He came as a populist candidate. So he has had an enormous influence on this administration. And to understand what has happened, earlier this summer, there was a proposed change in the law to the Anti-Corruption Agency, which is a completely separate, not tied into the judicial system of Ukraine, anti-corruption agency with its own prosecutors. That was proposed to be changed. The people came out into the streets even during a war time. Their independence was preserved. And what has happened in the last 3 weeks specifically is numerous members, either former ministers or even this chief of staff for President Zelenskyy, their homes have been raided by this independent prosecutor with no orders by the Attorney General of Ukraine or President Zelenskyy. And this demonstrates how serious the Ukrainian people are for fighting corruption. And within 12 hours since that raid happened, Mr. Yermak offered his resignation. President Zelenskyy had a video addressed to the nation, and he signed a presidential memorandum saying that Mr. Yermak has resigned and that he will be putting together a new head of the office within the next 24 hours.
Andrij, with Yermak's resignation and things being tenuous right now with the peace agreement potentially between Russia and Ukraine, does this compromise things at all, or do things continue to move forward?
Absolutely, things are moving forward. Now, one of the key people who were in negotiations was Mr. Yermak. He is a masterful negotiator, the kind of guy who is sweet on camera, but a tough-as-nails negotiator behind doors. He was an entertainment lawyer for a while. So he's the kind of person that gets results for President Zelenskyy. That has not stopped the team that's being sent to this negotiation, which will be happening with American and Ukrainian negotiators, not the one in Moscow, but a separate one. And that's still going forward with its professional negotiators, its diplomatic staff, as well as members of Ukrainian intelligence and military. So that's going to go ahead. The question is, for many outside observers, does Ukraine have the requisite kind of tough-as-nails negotiators that equal Yermak? And we'll see if that happens.
And last question I have for you on that topic with Yermak there, because I want people at home to understand, you drew the analogy between like a chief of staff here in the United States. Does any of that taint fall on President Zelenskyy, or are the Ukrainian people like, no, these are two separate things?
Well, two different views that are being expressed on Ukrainian television. One is, of course, President Zelenskyy must have known this man was his chief of staff since 2020, so how could he have not known? On the other hand, people are also very supportive of President Zelenskyy, again, going along with this reputation he had prior to being elected of being an independent voice. So clearly he must be an independent voice if he's not afraid to even throw away somebody who is close to him at even a whiff of corruption. So I think mostly people want to see what this investigation will entail. Will there be formal charges or not? But this was a resignation and a confirmation by the president of accepting this resignation just because there was a raid of his home. There were no formal charges filed. And I'll remind Americans that we've had senators accept gold bars and stayed in office for over a year. So I prefer the way Ukrainians are doing it. Even a whiff of corruption, let's get those people out of their office and have a temporary person assigned.
Just to be be clear, Andre, gold bars and Mercedes and gold bars stuffed in jackets, just so we're on the same page there. Andre, seriously, though, we now know that Steve Witkoff is heading to Moscow next week. What do you gather from the Kremlin confirming that visit? Could that mean a legitimate peace deal is on the horizon, or do you think that Putin is continuing to play games?
Almost all the rhetoric we're hearing from Putin, and he's had several speeches in the last week, has been that we are pressing ahead. We want to obtain more territory. So he's not talking in the vein of a peacemaker. There's no proposal for a ceasefire. Ukraine has a 30-day ceasefire deal with President Trump that's been in place since 260 days ago. So we're not hearing this from the side of Russia that they're willing to accept something. Now, what we're hearing in American newspapers today and in British newspapers is that potentially Witkoff is coming to Moscow to say to them that America will accept or recognize their control over occupied territories. Now, there is international law. You can't conquer territory. This would, be a problem for UN membership to occupy territory by force. But I just want to underscore for American audiences that back when Senator McCain and Republicans were complaining that Obama did not do enough to block the occupation of Crimea, a law was passed with no objection called the Ukraine Freedom Support Act. And in that law, it stated that official U.S. policy is to never recognize occupied territories by force by Russia and to help Ukraine get those territories back. So there have been other declarations, including Mike Pompeo doing a separate State Department declaration under President Trump. But my point here is that somebody in Congress will have to pass a law to allow President Trump to recognize foreign territory. And that's going to be a big question for Congress when it comes back into session next week.
And Andre, I've got one last question for you. We know that there are non-negotiables for President Zelenskyy. Primarily, he has talked about how he will not agree to an agreement where they give up land there along the east. We show that map often because we compare it to before the invasion of Russia to where Russia is occupying some of that territory and wants to push even further. Zelenskyy has made it clear that it's a red line that he will not cross. For his part, President Putin has said that he will not allow Ukraine to be considered for NATO. How do we get to a plan where both sides can agree?
Well, one of President Zelenskyy's key points is that he is not the one who decides what Ukraine's laws are. It's the Constitution of Ukraine. And the Constitution of Ukraine makes very clear what the territory of Ukraine is. So if we were to recognize occupied territory, it would be an entire nationwide referendum that would have to recognize that. Secondly, if you want to say that Ukraine will never be in NATO, you would have to also change Ukraine's constitution, which has a clause that Ukraine will seek NATO membership. That's also another popular petition and referendum that needs to happen. Now, as far as having that be a part of a deal, that includes all of NATO, because all of NATO needs to have a unanimous consent here. So neither is there unanimous consent to enter Ukraine into NATO, because we know there are several nations who stand against that, and that means it can't happen. And neither can you change the charter of NATO to say that Ukraine will never be a member of it, because, again, you have to have a unanimous consent for any changes like that. So these things that are being sold as, red lines or beyond what can be negotiated, a lot of those, like I mentioned, international law or U.S. law, a lot of these involve changes of law that you can't do at the negotiating table, which is why I'm glad that Marco Rubio and some of Ukraine's diplomats are at the table now, because we're actually getting to the point where we can talk about things that can be done, not just wish lists by somebody like Steve Witkoff, which to this day has never visited Ukraine yet. And
Senator Mitch McConnell also continues to push as well. Andrij Dobriansky, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend.
Thank you. You too.